Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. I'm John Dickerson. We want to welcome former South Carolina governor and now ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, to the broadcast. Ambassador Haley, thank you for being with us. I want to start with Russia. Russia experts say that Vladimir Putin's intervention in the American election was not about picking maybe one candidate or another, but destabilizing American institutions. When you look at all the back and forth and the charges and the tweets that have been in the last few weeks, hasn't he already succeeded in doing that?
None of my colleagues or ambassadors from other countries are talking about D.C. chatter. What they are talking about is the fact that they're relieved that the United States is starting to lead again. I will tell you, we don't ever want any country to interfere with our elections. We need to be very strong on that. We need to make sure that that is heard, and we need to respond accordingly. But really, in my world, we're focusing on what's happening in the United Nations and the fact that the United States is now having a strong voice. And really, my counterparts are very happy to see that.
In your world, then, they're not concerned about Russian efforts to meddle in elections in America relative to its efforts to meddle in elections in other countries and in Europe? There's no talk about that at all?
No one's talking to me about that. What we have talked about is obviously Russia's influence in Ukraine, in which we've been very loud against, talking about Crimea. We've also talked about how Russia needs to help move the Iranian influence out of Syria, how we need to be working on getting ISIS out. Those are the things that are being talked about at the United Nations.
Vladimir Putin said that Russia did not interfere in the U.S. election. Did he lie?
Well, I've always said we don't trust Russia, and I think we're all aware that Russia was involved in the elections. And so I'm not going to talk about who's lying and who's not. I know that that's a very real thing. And so what we're doing from here going forward is we're going to be strong. We're going to be loud. We're going to make sure that when we can work with them, we can. But when they do something wrong, we're going to call them out and say it.
You said the U.S. is going to confront Russia. How?
Well, we did that with what they did with Crimea and what they've been doing in the Ukraine. We've called them out. We've been loud about it, and we've said that we don't agree with it. And the way that we feel like they protect too much of Assad when he is a war criminal and he has done terrible things to the people in Syria. And so we've continued to call them out for that.
Calling out is just verbally, though. Anything more than that? Would you support, say, the legislation in the Senate, the Countering Russian Hostilities Act?
I have not read that, but I will tell you I am in support of going against Russia when we need to. We certainly put sanctions on Russia for how they took over Crimea. We have continued to put pressure on them. Those things are going to continue to happen as we need to. And at the United Nations, that's something that I'm going to continue to do. And that's something the administration has supported me doing as we go forward.
How do you convince another country to act collectively when the message of the American president in foreign policy is America first?
Well, I think that we acted collectively on Friday. What we saw was we have started peacekeeping reform, which is the biggest part of the United Nations budget, and certainly 29% of what the United States has paid towards that budget. And we started our peacekeeping reforms and reduced troop levels in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We're making sure there's going to be a strategic review in September. We are making sure that we're putting troops where we can have strong elections and keep the people safe. We're focused on how we're going to make sure we bring accountability to the contributing countries that do put troops there so that there's not any corruption or sexual exploitation. So I think we have been speaking with one voice, and there's a new culture at the United Nations.
But a lot of those things were underway before you got there. I guess what I'm wondering is when you talk to diplomats there about the president, do you say that they should take him literally in everything he says about foreign policy?
Well, those things didn't happen before. That negotiation with the Democratic Republic of Congo just happened within the past month. So that's something that's happened while I've been there and what we're doing going forward. No one's talking to me about the president's tweets. No one's talking to me about any of those issues.
So should foreign leaders, the president tweets something, they should ignore it?
I think the foreign leaders are picking up the phone and calling him if they have an issue, and that's what they're doing with me. If they have an issue, they're calling me. They're not sitting there texting me and saying, what was this tweet about?
Because in diplomacy, having covered it for the words often get tangled and mixed, and people obsess about the importance of words. So say going into the president's meeting with the president of China, he has in the past say, we can't continue to allow China to rape our country. So those are pretty strong words. How is a foreign leader coming to a visit supposed to weigh those words in advance of their meeting?
I think that what you do is you have face-to-face meetings. This is all about relationships, and it is about trying to find some level of trust. And when it comes to the issue of North Korea, it's something we're very concerned about. China's very aware of that. I think you saw Secretary Tillerson go to Beijing. I have talked with my Chinese counterpart and told them that we need to see actions on the side of China, and I think that the president and also President Xi will talk about what those actions need to be and what we need to see so that we start to feel like we are working together and not watching North Korea do their own thing and China support it. So, these face-to-face meetings are extremely important. These conversations are extremely important because that's when you get all the chatter out of the way and when you actually focus on getting things done.
So the president's tweets are basically just chatter.
I don't know. You'd have to ask everybody else. I don't hear about them. I don't talk about them. I don't have them interfere in everything that I'm doing. And so to me, it's chatter I don't focus on. But, you can talk to President Xi and ask him if he's reading those tweets. I don't know.
Let me ask you about South Sudan, Somalia, Nigeria, and Yemen. The UN says this is the worst famine in 70 years. Possibly 20 million people could die. The president has cut funding in his budget for foreign aid and for humanitarian aid. How is that possible when the world is facing perhaps the greatest famine crisis in 70 years?
Well, I think what the president was trying to do was show in his budget that he wants to build up the military equipment again, strengthen the military so that we can face the threats that are happening around the world. And I think at the same time, he wants to see value in the United Nations, and he wants to make sure that no other countries are just taking us for granted. I have been in constant talks with the Secretary General and members of the United Nations about how we need to see smarter spending and not just add troops to peacekeeping missions for the sake of adding them, but actually look at how we can be smarter in terms of how we're handling issues around the world instead of just being fatter. And what I've been pleasantly surprised is we are getting a lot of cooperation. Famine is something that when you look at those four areas, we are extremely concerned about it. The United States has always been the moral conscience of the world. We're going to continue to express our values and continue to make sure we show that not just in our words, but in our actions.
But wouldn't it, Madam Ambassador, show it in your actions by spending more on the kind of aid that would go to those areas where 20 million people are in risk of dying as a result of famine? That isn't the U.S. position as moral leader to rush in and lead when you are faced with this Stage 4 crisis, as the World Food Organization claims it. So what, other than rhetorically, talking about peacekeeping is just a separate matter. What is the U.S. doing to take this moral position in the face of this humanitarian crisis?
Well, peacekeeping may be a separate matter, but it's the largest part of the United Nations budget. So understand that's an important part, and that's why we're trying to work so hard on that. When it comes to the other issues, we're just saying they need to work smarter. We want to make sure that when food goes to an area, it's actually going to the people that need it. We want to make sure that there is no corruption on the ground. We want to make sure the governments are allowing that to go in. So when you talk about South Sudan, you have to talk about the fact that its government is not allowing us to take aid into that area. So I know that the budget came out, but we also know there's many steps before Congress and the president come together on what a new budget should look like.
Is there anything the United States is doing specifically to respond to this specific humanitarian crisis?
Well, we are meeting on all of these issues, but more importantly than that, when it comes to South Sudan, the conversations I'm having with my counterparts is what are we going to do to the governments when they're not allowing the aid to get in? We're seeing that in Syria. We're seeing that in South Sudan. We've got to do more than just slap the back of the hand of a government who's allowing their people to die right in front of their face. We have to go in there and tell them you can't be the hindrance to what's keeping people from getting food and medical help.
All right, Ambassador Haley, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much.